1 Kings chapter 2, beginning in verse 1. This is God's word, eternally true. When the time drew near for David to die, he gave a charge to Solomon his son. I am about to go the way of all the earth, he said. So be strong, show yourself a man, and observe what the Lord your God requires. Walk in his ways, and keep his decrees and commands, his laws and requirements as written in the law of Moses, so that you may prosper in all you do and wherever you go, and that the Lord may keep his promise to me. If your descendants watch how they live, if they walk faithfully before me with all their heart and soul, you will never fail to have a man on the throne of Israel. Here ends our reading. We have a response of thankfulness that's printed for us there in our bulletins. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Thanks indeed. Let's pray. I always, growing up, wanted to be like my dad. His voice, and I would get mistaken for him when I would answer the phone. Our heads are the same. Our nasal cavities are the same, to the chagrin of a few of my daughters. We get sinus headaches and migraines like my dad would. But my voice, my facial expressions, certain abilities, I was thrilled to see that my wrists and my hands and my fingers were just like my dad's. His were a little bit thicker than mine, but my nails are just like my dad's, and my thumbs are like my dad's, and the way everything tilts, and even the way my hand tilts on top of my wrists is just like my dad's. And that made things very convenient because my dad was a good shooter in basketball. He could really shoot. And he would come out, and I'd be practicing in the driveway, and he would come, and he'd do this to his tie. You know, he'd park out, he'd do this to his tie, and I'd throw the ball out to him, and he'd go like that. That's kind of how he shot, like that. And swish. Yeah, and so he could teach me how to shoot just like him, and I didn't have to make any adjustments. I could just arrange my body like his. My upper body, my rib cage, my stomach, everything was just the way his torso, his shoulders. And I was happy about this. I was glad when I began to look like him more and more as I grew up. And I loved my dad. One, because I knew with him as my dad, I was safe. Okay, hit the lights. I have proof. You've heard this story before, and Jim loses. Okay, there we go. Wow, that's dark. Okay, now I need to, no, okay, there we go. Okay, Jim. Wow. Oh, okay. Sorry. There we go. Now. All right, can you see that? You know my story about before a soccer game, kicking the ball away from Tom Fabiano. You know, we would set our balls up at about the 18-yard by the penalty box there, and the goalie would say, now you go. And then we would kick the ball. And I came across these old pictures this week, and so I thought I'd show you this really existed. This is Tom Fabiano. Now, he doesn't look big here, and he's not. But when you're a kid, if someone's arms are like a half an inch thicker than yours, that's big. And he was kind of like a bully kid. He played left wing. That's me there. And I played right wing. That's my Minnesota Vikings coat there. I think we're in Maryland there playing in a tournament. And but you can see I'm a little bit smaller than Tom. Tom's over here. There he is. But I kicked Tom's ball away one too many times. You know, he had it all set up, and the goalie said, okay, Tom, you. And I would run out in front and kick his ball. And then I did it a second time, and he said, if you do that one more time, Musgrave, coming after you. And I did it, you know. It's like Paul says, right? If you say, I wouldn't have, coveted if God didn't say don't covet. So I did that, and he came after me. Out there on this, I think it was this very field. And so my dad saw it from the sideline. It was before the game, and he came out and he stopped Tom Fabiano. It wasn't much of a match, but for me it was a great relief. All right, so go ahead and hit the lights there. I thought you'd find that as fun. Um, but I knew I was safe if my dad were around. I was. He protected me. He made sure I was always okay. But secondly, I admired my dad for his character, for the things he had accomplished in his life. He was someone other people admired, and they'd tell me. I'd have friends tell me, I really like your dad. And they'd tell me something about my dad. And sometimes there were kids who were older than me who I wasn't really friends with. And I was like half scared when they approached me. And then they said, hey, man, I like your dad. He's, this, or he's done this, or that kind of thing. And so that made that made me like my dad even more for his character, for who he was. And my dad, and you've heard this before if you've been around too, you know that in our family, my dad had this expression that we heard a lot, and to me, he'd say, John, I know that's what everybody else does, but we're not everybody else. I know all your friends do this. I know all your friends' parents allow them to do that, and they don't care, but I care, and we don't do that. And I always knew that under this was this great love for me. He wanted me to be as good as I could be, and he wanted me to have good character as well. And so I always loved my dad for that. And such is the case for anyone who's in God's kingdom. In the kingdom of Christ, we're safe. And we're safe because Jesus is our King. And because God the Father, Ephesians 1 verse 22, he's put all things under Jesus' feet. All principalities, all authorities, all powers have been placed under Jesus' feet for the church. So it doesn't mean everything's all okay now. It's not. It won't be till the new heavens and new earth. But everything for a believer, everyone who's a citizen in God's kingdom, everything's okay. Because all authorities, all powers are under Jesus' feet, and he is ruling them all to protect his church. And of course, Romans 8:28 is true because of this. We have confidence that all things are working together for our good, for the good of those who have been called unto Jesus in faith. And so we're safe under Jesus. And also under Jesus in his kingdom, we're not like everybody else. We know that people in the world are doing all kinds of things, but we're not the world. We're not a part of that kingdom of darkness anymore. We're not like everybody else. And that's to be so. So there's good news. And if you'd like to fill out blanks in an outline, you're welcome to do that. It's there in your bulletin. If you want to just listen, that's fine too. But number one, from this passage, as we continue on looking in this, there's good news. Jesus' faithfulness, his characteristic of faithfulness never ended, and it never will end. So we can read in Hebrews 4:15 that Jesus was made like us in every way, yet without sin. Or we can read in 1 Peter 2:22 that he committed no sin, nor was deceit found in his mouth. Jesus was always faithful. He followed the law which he had written in every way, all the time. He didn't transgress it. God even had his parents not transgress it, bringing him to the temple and for cleansings at the right time after he was born. But why should we care about this, that Jesus is faithful? Well, for a few reasons. And here's one on point. His being faithful always, his always being faithful means, A, in your outline there, that you will always be protected and defended. You will always be protected and defended. 2 Samuel 7:14 that Jim read for us this morning, God the Father says of David, the king of God's people. Now, Jesus is the son of David, but God says this of David and his sons. I will be his father, and he will be my son. When he does wrong, now here's something we'll see even in Solomon's life, the first son of David. When he does wrong, I will punish him with the rod of men, with the floggings inflicted by men. And so, if you were reading 2 Samuel, you would know this was something that had come true, that Solomon had not been faithful. Or if you were reading 1 Kings, rather, you would know that Solomon had not been faithful, and that you had endured, Solomon's descendants had, and then you had. You were sitting in exile reading 1st and 2nd Kings. That's when it's written. They're in Babylon. You would know that the floggings, the rod of men, had come upon you because your king had been unfaithful. First Solomon, and then Solomon being an example for his sons and grandsons and great-grandsons after him. There were many who were unfaithful. Even in Judah, there are 12 unfaithful kings and 12 unfaithful and 8 faithful. So the unfaithful kings outnumber the faithful kings in the kingdom of Judah. And so God's people suffer because of the unfaithfulness of their kings. But here's the good news. Our Son of David, who will forever be our Son of David and King, Jesus, is faithful, and there was no sin in him. He didn't sin before he came to the earth. He didn't sin during his time on the earth. He never will sin. He is made like us, yes, taking on human flesh, yet he is without sin. And this means for him and for those who are under him, we will not have to endure the floggings of men in eternity. So Jesus' faithfulness never ended. We will always be protected and defended. But we hear God's promises to David and to his faithful sons. And we hear this, and God says, and I will provide a place for my people Israel. I will cut off all your enemies before you. You will no longer be disturbed. Wicked people will not oppress them, and I will give you rest from all your enemies. And this is good news. When there's a faithful king, we're given rest from all our enemies. Okay, lights. It's often, I'm a very visual person, and I can grab this in my head, but I thought I'd put this on here too. I recently started watching this thing on Amazon Prime on knights. I wanted to find out about knights, historically, knights, who were they, and that kind of thing. One thing that was interesting that I learned was that a lord of a land would have a castle, but it wasn't just a castle, it was a little village that surrounded his castle, and this castle would be surrounded by a great high wall and a moat, and he would have a kingdom. This lord would, this king would, and he would have citizens in his kingdom, and this kingdom's represented by that rectangular box there, and so people would live on his land, and the people would get to live on the king's land, and they would farm and produce various kinds of produce and food, and they would give a certain amount of it for the king. He didn't need a ton of it, and they could keep the rest for themselves. And as a result of farming for him, in essence, he provided for them protection. And so when a foreign army would come and start to encroach on God's people, you like these guys? That the people there in the kingdom would see this, and they could go inside the walls that surrounded the castle. And this was part of the contract between in the feudal system, between a serf, right, S-E-R-F, somebody just farming the land out in the kingdom, that land that belonged to the king, and the king himself. And the king would guarantee for all his serfs, for all the people who were farming the land, that any time a foreign invader came and encroached upon the land, that they could run inside the walls, and that the gate and the bridge, the drawbridge, would be down for them. And then they would draw that drawbridge back up so that all the people would be safe. And this was a good agreement between the people and the king, so that they would be safe in this scenario. And that's the kind of thing that we have with Jesus, that he's this king who protects us. We're out there, we're here on the earth, and we're working and trying to expand his kingdom, but we're protected. We're protected by him in the land. Okay, you can hit those lights there. So we have protection and defense from our King Jesus because he's faithful. And he's faithful to us. He doesn't draw up the drawbridge and let us get eaten by the wolves. By the way, by the invading armies. By the way, there were very few battles that knights engaged in because the castles and the walls were so impenetrable. It was almost a death sentence to attack one of these. And so it happened very, very infrequently, somewhere on the level like once every 65 years in a kingdom. So the strong defense and having this great castle. And so we can know that about Jesus. You know, he's the God of all creation, and he protects us. You know, this doesn't mean that you won't have trouble in your life, and we'll talk about this in a little bit. But the second thing we can know, because of Jesus' faithfulness and why we care, Jesus will be faithful to protect and defend us, but Jesus will also be faithful to prosper us. That's your next blank there. You will prosper in your life. This is through Jesus' ministry and care of you in the church. Jesus said in John 10:10, you know, I came that they might have life and might have it abundantly. Again, that doesn't mean that everything's going to go your way zippity-doo-dah, right? But this means your soul will prosper. In persecution, your soul will prosper. You'll become a more beautiful and lovely person. You'll become better, more good. I almost said gooder there. In your life, you'll become what you were created to be, what a human person was created to be progressively as you follow him in your life. And you'll experience this prosperity in your life. Even if you die for your faith, you will die with joy in having the privilege of dying for your faith. Peter gets into this in 1 Peter and says, if we suffer as a Christian, wow, the glory of that. 1 Peter 4. Rejoice that you get to suffer as a Christian. See, that's soul prosperity. Nobody's doing well all the time. Rich people have, you know, I was reading an article in AARP magazine about George Clooney. And this guy was in love with George Clooney, who was interviewing him. Really loves him. But George Clooney talked about his own kids and how, you know, he didn't give his kids weird names because he said it's hard enough being a celebrity kid. You know, he said Bing Crosby had 2 kids who killed themselves. Who else? Do you remember, Betsy? He named two other celebrities, you know, real famous people, nice people, whose kids killed themselves. You know, and so rich people, you know, famous stories, John Paul Getty, Howard Hughes. I mean, their kids are just a mess. Some of the Rockefellers. It's hard. So money doesn't solve things for us. Prospering physically doesn't solve things for us. And so it's a much better promise to have a prospering soul. Because a prospering soul endures through persecution, through poverty, through unjust imprisonment, through whatever it is. And so this is a promise to us. Jesus says, life in me is prosperous. I came that they might have life and that it might be abundant. John 10:10. Now Jesus was aware of persecution. 6 chapters later, John 16:33, he says, in this life you will be persecuted. In this world you'll have trouble. But take courage, I've overcome this world. You can also translate that word trouble, tribulation. You'll have tribulation in this life. Things that cause you grief in this life. But in the midst of the grief, your soul will be well. Isn't that a great song, It Is Well With My Soul? You know, Horatio Spafford, who wrote that song, you know, literally he's in England and he's been away from his family, and his family is coming over on ship to visit him, and the ship crashes in the Atlantic Ocean, and he loses his kids and his wife. And he writes, it is well with my soul. And so sorrows and sea billows roll. Whatever my lot, it is well with my soul. he knew Christ and it was okay. That's the promise. That's why things are good for us as Christians. That's why it's good news. Jesus is faithful. He's faithful to prosper us in our souls, in our lives, regardless of what's going on the external. So that's true in our life through his ministry to us, his care for you and for me in the church. And he ministers to you through his word, by his Spirit, through officers in the church, through the fellowship of others in the church, through his sacraments. He encourages you. This is him prospering your soul as your king. But he also prospers you in your death. That's your next blank there. When you die, immediately your soul to heaven, right? The souls of believers are at their death. Do pass immediately unto glory. And so this is what Paul looks forward to in Philippians 1. He's in jail and he might die. And he says, if I stay here, it'll mean good things for you because I'll minister to you and I'll teach you God's word and that'll help your souls to prosper. And I kind of think God's going to keep me here, but what shall I choose? For it's far better for me to die and be with the Lord. Okay, so Jesus, as your king, if Jesus is your king, he's prospering you even in death. And you don't have to fear death. But as you hit death, like we sing in number 10 in our old song, I greet thee whom my sure Redeemer art. That as we approach death, we do not need to fear. And then he prospers us at final judgment. He prospers us at final judgment and in the new heavens and new earth. Matthew 25, 31 through 34. We looked at that yesterday in officers training. This is Jesus saying, he divides the sheep from the goats, and he identifies the sheep, those who are his, and to them he says, welcome. Take hold of the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the earth. Blessed are you forever. So this is Jesus, our King, and he prospers us. And David understood this as he said these words to Solomon. Because he had heard these words from Nathan the prophet, that as the king was faithful, he and the people under him, the people of God in the kingdom of the Son of David, would prosper. And so at death, you won't have the rods of men or the rods of the evil one, Satan, against you. Because Jesus, your good king, took the rods of men and the punishment that you deserved upon himself. Okay, this is why the king of Israel in Isaiah 53 is singled out as the one being punished for the sins of himself and all the people. He's carried off and esteemed not. Now, number two. So there's good news. Jesus is faithful. He always is faithful. He'll be faithful to you all through your life and prosper you and protect you. He'll be faithful to you and prosper you and protect you in death and then in the new heavens and new earth as well. But number two, for us here, well, what does that have to do with us? Isn't this a command from David from king to king? From king to his successor, his son, Solomon. But what else? Well, it's this idea that we're to be like our king. That's your number two. Be like your king. Romans 8:29, you can read this in the Declaration of the Gospel in your bulletin there. For those God foreknew, he also predestined. Now, he predestined us to eternal life, but look what he says here. He predestined you to be conformed to the likeness of his Son. You're to be like Jesus. And he predestined you to be conformed to the likeness of his Son. Here's what that means. The people should be like their king. Jesus is our king. We should be like him. Okay, so we're to be conformed to the likeness of his Son. We'll look at this in different ways now. Number three. Be like your faithful king instead of being disciplined within his kingdom. Be like your faithful king instead of being disciplined within his kingdom. So we have verse 4 there, which is in line with 2 Samuel 7:14. The son of David could be disciplined foreign armies could come in, and that would be chaos for God's people. And so David was pleading with Solomon here, be faithful for the sake of the people. 2 Samuel 7:14 talks about the rods of men coming in. This was the case for all the sons of David. Their not being like their faithful heavenly king with all their heart and soul would cause David to fail. So look at verse 4 there. Fail to have a man serving as king in Israel. We know that eventually comes true with the exile, in 605 to 586 BC. David fails to have a man leading as king in Israel. And this was because of the lack of faithfulness of the kings. But the Old Testament Israelites were disciplined with troubles in the Promised Land throughout their history. They were exiled from the Promised Land when they failed to be like their faithful kings in their character and their actions. And we read this continues today. Hebrews 12. It tells us, hey, you like God as your Father, that's great. He is your Father. And you get to call him Abba, Father. Romans 8. But God as a Father, he loves you. Hebrews 12. And what does a loving father do? Let his kid run out and play on the railroad tracks when you hear the whoo, whoo coming? No, a loving father makes sure his kid's not on the railroad tracks. And if his kid doesn't obey, he forces obedience. He goes on the railroad tracks, grabs the kid by his shirt, and gets him off the railroad tracks. A loving father disciplines his kids. And if a kid won't quit playing on the railroad tracks, if a kid won't quit running into the street when his ball goes out there in the street, the father will say, you can't play out in the front yard anymore. You're grounded for a week. And then you can play in the backyard with all the fence around you. And when I'm convinced you have, and in your understanding that you can't just run out in this street to get your ball till you've looked both ways, I'm not going to let you play in the front yard, even though that's the flatter surface and easier to play on. A loving father disciplines his children because he loves them. He doesn't want his kids to kill themselves or to bring the disfavor of their authorities on them. Wants to prepare them for fruitful service in their future jobs. Wants to give them skills so they can study and not flunk out of school and do well and be in favor with God and men like Jesus was, we read in Luke chapter 2. So that's a choice you and I have. The path of being like our King and enjoying the blessings of God in our day-to-day, or the path of being like everyone else, like others in the world. And God's having to, out of love, discipline us. So note that while, and here's your next line there, if you're a blank filler outer, which most of you are. While our King's faithfulness secures our eternal well-being. This is a very important point for you to get, a point most people don't understand. It's really helpful to understand as you look at Scripture. Our King's faithfulness secures our eternal well-being. So now that you have saving faith, there's nothing you can do to not have eternal life. You have eternal life in the present. You will have eternal life when you die. When Jesus comes back, you'll have eternal life then. You'll always be in his blessing eternally. There's nothing you can do in your percentage of faithfulness and unfaithfulness because you have truly been regenerated as an elect person. You will never be insecure. You are not insecure if you have faith in Jesus. You're not insecure in regard to your eternity. Here's what that means. That black box, you're always within it. The wall is too tall and it's an electric fence. You can't get out. Sorry, but you don't want to get out either. You're in West Germany, not East. Right? It's the socialist countries, the East German countries. Everyone's trying to get out. So they build walls in this, what was that, like 30 yards worth of barbed wire in Berlin, an electric fence, and guard towers with people who would shoot you if you were trying to get out of East Germany, right? The kingdom of God is not East Germany. No one's trying to get out. No one in West Germany was trying to get back to East Germany. the guard stations were facing East Germany. They didn't have to worry about someone from West Germany wanting to, someone from freedom and prosperity, someone from BMW and Mercedes land, right? And good German beer, trying to get into East Germany so they could drive a car that looked like a tin can, right? But for us, because we have faith in Jesus, we're in that rectangle. We're in West Germany, and we don't want to get out. But even if we wanted to, we couldn't. Or even if we think, and sometimes we as Christians wrongly think, oh, I can out-sin the grace of Jesus. And we can't. We can't climb that wall. And it's an electric wall, an electric fence. Visions of Eddie Grant there. Okay. So we're safe eternally because of Jesus. So how does this thing of discipline work out? To continue on in your sentence there. Our King's faithfulness secures our eternal well-being. That's on him. He secures, as our King, our eternal well-being. But our not being like Jesus may bring his discipline upon us. Our not, that's the rest of your sentence. Our not being like Jesus may bring his discipline on us within his kingdom as we live on the earth. Now, Jesus isn't going to, his intent is not to embarrass you and that kind of thing. So he's not going to put you in the stocks, right, to think of a feudal system. But a king who loved his serfs might put somebody in the stocks or might discipline him in some way for his own good and for the safety of his fellow citizens in the kingdom. But the king wouldn't catapult somebody, still in the feudal system here, wouldn't catapult somebody over the wall. So your eternal security is utterly secure because you've believed, you have saving faith, but because you have a loving Father who cares about you, who wants you to be able to live in the way you were created to live. And when we live in the way we're created to live, we're blessed. Our soul prospers. Because God cares about that, because of you, he will discipline you. And it's all based on how close is your life to the life of Jesus. How close is your attitude to the attitude of Jesus? How close are your actions to the actions of Jesus? How close are your words to the words of Jesus? Now, God's very gracious in that. We're never utterly like Jesus in our words and the way we say them and the attitude in which we say it. So God has great grace to his people like he did to Old Testament Israel. They were in great sin before, they got discipline brought upon them. But that's how that works. God's a father who disciplines you within his kingdom. And so this can mean, it can mean temporal things happen to you. Things aren't going well in your life. It can mean, if you yell at your boss, which you're not supposed to do, honor your father and mother, means treat your authorities with respect. If you chew at your boss, you're not going to get that promotion, and that's a discipline upon you. And that's God in his sovereignty teaching you, respect your authorities. Be an example. Show them how someone in the kingdom of God treats Jesus, your king. Okay. So don't be like Otis and Andy Griffith, right? Otis doesn't get kicked out of Mayberry, but when he's drunk, he comes and checks himself in the jail cell, grabs the keys, unlocks it, grabs in there, then reaches out, hangs the keys back up, and then, goes and spends the night on a wooden bench up against the concrete wall. Okay? Don't spend your Christian life on a wooden bench up against a concrete wall. Be at home. Be in your own bed. Enjoy the blessings of God by being like your king and just enjoying his blessings. You don't have to be perfectly like your King, Jesus, but have your life directed in that way, because God just wants to bless you, and he just recognizes your and my puny, efforts to be like Jesus, and he says, "Way to go." He doesn't. The coach treats the 4-year-old running different than he treats, Olympic marathoner. Okay, he recognizes the difference, and when he sees your effort, he says, "Way to go. All right, you see how that feels? See how that feels? How that feels good? Yeah, keep going. And there's this encouragement from him above. So be like your king so that you don't have to mess with discipline. God doesn't want to discipline you, but he will because he's committed to you. My dad and my mom hated disciplining me, but they did because they didn't want me to be a bane to people's classrooms and to teams I was on or in any situation I went in. They wanted me to be a delight for my teachers, and so they disciplined me. And God wants you to be a delight to even the nasty people who are around you. And so that's why we love those who hate us. And Jesus commands us to do that. So now, how do we do that? How are we like our King? That's your number 4. To be like your King Jesus, you must. Here's some things that are outlined in verses 2 through 4 here for Solomon. That David says, okay, Solomon, here's what you're to be like. Okay, 1A, take up responsibility. You yourself, you are responsible to be like Jesus. As a Christian, you bear his name, Christ. You just add an I and an A and an N on that. And part of taking the Lord's name in vain is being a Christian and not acting like Jesus. Being a Christian and it means nothing to you. Being a Christian and acting like the world, like everybody else, that's taking the Lord's name that you have on your back as a Christian and having it count for nothing. Not being kind to people, not being patient. And I'm not kind and I'm not patient. So it's all a measure of degree on this. But we take up responsibility. We say, I have Jesus' name on my back. People know I'm a Christian. People see me leaving my house in the morning on Sundays to go to church, or I've told them that I'm a Christian. And so I need to bear that in mind, and I need to take responsibility to be like my King in my actions, my words, and my attitudes. And so this is David to Solomon, and he says, show yourself a man. What does this mean? Okay, and so, this is, you can hardly say this in today's society. But what does this mean biblically? Show yourself a man. You know who sins first in the garden? You know who sins first in the garden? Eve. You know who gets blamed? Adam. Because Adam's responsible for Eve. That's his role. He's responsible for all that happens in the garden. And he's not responsible. Even when he sees Eve is taking this eaten from this tree they were commanded not to eat. We don't know, did Adam not tell her, or did he not emphasize this enough? Was he not responsible that this tree not, did he not build a fence around this? He didn't do what he needed to do. And even when Eve presents him with this, he's not responsible before God to say, no, that's wicked. I can't do that. I can't join in with you. Be a man, Adam. It's like my brother, Mark, my mom will laugh as she's listening here on Facebook. Mark would say, come on, John. He said, don't be a pansy. Mallory works for my brother, so she'll recognize that too. Don't be a pansy. And he'd push me, on my shoulders. Come on. He'd say it just like that. Be a man. Take responsibility. Don't say, I'm tired. Come on. You want to win? Don't play to lose. That's not, my dad would say. It's no fun to lose. Now, when I lost, my dad was just gracious. It's like, if I played hard and we lost, my dad didn't care. He's proud of me because I played hard. But that's what David means to Solomon. Be a man. Take responsibility. You got this whole kingdom under you. And if you're faithful, the kingdom will prosper. It's not just you. And this is the case, so women don't say this is not for me. As a mother, as a wife, as a worker, the things you do, people are depending on you. And if you're not like Jesus in what you're doing as a mom or a wife or a daughter or a worker in your workplace, people will suffer and they won't prosper because you're not being like Jesus. Right? Jesus did what he was assigned to do, and it cost him his life. Okay, so do what you're assigned to do. Take responsibility in your life so that the people around you can prosper. Okay, so be a man. Take up responsibility, A. B, keep God's commands so that you are like Jesus, who kept all the commandments. So this is, how many ways can David say this, right? Look at verse 3. Verse 3, observe what the Lord your God requires. That's one way. Walk in his ways, number 2. 3, keep his decrees and his commands, his laws and requirements, as written in the book of Moses. Okay, so 6 different ways of saying, obey God's laws. Do what he commands. Do what he commands you to do. Keep God's commands. And so we see that Jesus did this. Again, 1 Peter 2:22, Jesus committed no sin. Jim read for us this morning, James 1:22 through 25. James says, hey, guys, James, this is Jesus' half-brother. He was the chief pastor of the church in Jerusalem. The church got scattered with the stoning of Stephen, and James writes this book to people who used to be in his congregation. And he says to them, don't just look at the commands and walk away and forget what they say. That would be like looking in a mirror and seeing what you look like and walking away and say, wait, do I have red hair or green? I forget. That's ridiculous that you'd look at God's law, that you'd look at his commands and then forget and walk away and not do them. But James says, but do the commands. And the one who does the commands, the law which gives freedom. These commands, they bring freedom to your life and prosperity to your life, prosperity to your soul. The one who does these commands is blessed in what he does. Blessed in the doing. Verse 25, James 1. I love that verse. It's what a guide for our souls. Why do we obey? It's not to go to heaven. If what we did caused us to go to heaven or not go to heaven, none of us would go to heaven. Why do we obey? Because we're blessed in the doing of it. It prospers our life. It makes us feel good inside, but it also improves our relationships. It gets all kinds of good things come to us as we're walking in the commands of God, walking in his ways, observing what the Lord our God requires, keeping his decrees and commands, his laws and requirements. Again, Jesus did it. He did not sin. And we want to be like our King. Jesus was blessed in his keeping of all God's commands, even that command beyond the law of Moses to go to the cross. That was a command Jesus had that we don't have. And so Jesus goes and he dies. Is he blessed in the doing? Absolutely. Risen from the dead, ascended on high, seated at the right hand of God the Father, name above all names, to whom every knee will bow and every tongue confess, you are Lord, even though I got it wrong in this life. Or you are Lord, as you let me know and open my eyes to see in my life on earth. So observe what the Lord commands. The bulletin was already printed, so I couldn't add it. Write this down on your B point there. Leviticus 18, 1 through 5. It was in my reading yesterday, as I was reading after officers training, in my Bible reading. Turn there. Please turn there. Leviticus 18. But this is better than, some days you see the perfect verse on Monday for yesterday's sermon. You're like, oh, I should have been reading ahead. Leviticus 18, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. So third book. So David commands Solomon to obey all the laws, the decrees, the commandments, to walk in God's ways. Look at what's commanded of all God's people in Leviticus 18. Verse 1, the Lord said to Moses, speak to the Israelites, Moses, to everybody, and say to them, I am the Lord your God. You must not do as they do in Egypt, where you used to live, and you must not do as they do in the land of Canaan. You're not everybody else, John. I know everybody does that, but we don't. Where I am bringing you. Do not follow their practices. Look at verse 4. You must obey my laws and be careful to follow my decrees. I am the Lord your God. Keep my decrees and laws. For the man who obeys them will live by them. This is the connotation. You'll live in the promised land. You won't get exiled. You'll live by them. I am the Lord. So what's David up to when he talks to Solomon? And he says, keep the decrees. It's the king had this role that he kept the decrees, not that he was the only one who had to keep the decrees in the kingdom. But the king kept the decrees, the laws of God, the commands of God as the example of keeping the decrees and the laws in the kingdom. So people could look to the king and say, that's how I am to be. I'm to be like my king, and his whole heart, soul, mind, and strength is devoted to our God. That's the way David was. And people could look to David and see his devotion to God and his desiring to follow God in all God's commandments. And when David didn't, he repented and he was in grief, and he went into the tabernacle and publicly humiliated himself for his sin. He didn't care what people thought of him. He cared what God thought of him. He was in grief that he had disobeyed God's law and been unfaithful to God in that degree, committing adultery and murder. So Jesus and James tell us to do this. The commands of God are not arbitrary. They flow along God's character. So God tells us, be patient. Why? Because he's patient. He wants us to show off his character in this life. God tells us to forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors, because he forgives. We know that. God tells us to be kind to the wicked and ungrateful, because our Father in heaven, Luke 6, is kind to the wicked and ungrateful. So there's this great significance of our obedience to the Lord, is we are glorifying God, or in other words, we're showing off his character in the world. It's what we read and declared in our declaration of faith this morning about good works. Why are good works important? We are declaring by what we do when we're doing the things that are commanded. We are declaring the character of God. We're bringing the character of God into this sinful, dark world. We're being patient and compassionate and loving to people who are wicked to us. And that's not the way of the world, to quote Earth, Wind, and Fire. That's not the way of the world. That's the way of Jesus. That's the way of our King. And we bring glory to our King when we do what is contrary to the world's ways and do what's in the way of Jesus. So we keep God's commands to be like our King. Then C. We don't heartlessly do this, but verse 4, we keep God's commands with all of our heart and all of our soul. David says to Solomon, don't just externally obey. Don't just have it be external obedience. Have this be your heart and soul thing. And when you find yourself in grief, or when your Nathan the prophet comes to you and declares to you your sin, repent and be in grief. Be truly sorrowful over it, both for your unfaithfulness to God, but for what that might mean for God's people. God's people were in chaos after the sin with Bathsheba. After David's sin with Bathsheba. The rest of 2 Samuel is kind of chaos. And it was no chaos. It was peace before then. And so David tells us in a very heartfelt way to Solomon to have heartfelt obedience to the Lord. So Deuteronomy 6:5, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, with all your strength. And Jesus did this absolutely. That is, what's inside you as you obey is important. Now, obey even if it's just external, but that's just the starter. Work on then having that be a more heartfelt obedience, more and more and more. In other words, don't murder somebody because you say, well, my motivation's not right. I feel like murdering him. If I didn't murder him, it would be out of bad motives. I just am doing this because Jesus told me not to. No. Externally obey and don't murder somebody, but also have your heart love him instead of hating him. Okay? Matthew 23:27, Jesus condemned the Pharisees for their external-only obedience. He said, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You're like whitewashed tombs. You look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of dead men's bones and everything unclean. And so Solomon and we are not to be all unclean inside, just doing things to look good on the outside, but we're to be clean on the inside. So if someone could see our hearts in doing something, that they could see that those hearts are good. And some of you are so great at this, in our church here, you fret over and you grieve over the way you said something or something that you said. And so you come to me and say, oh, I feel like I need to apologize, to them. I say, no, if you could see that scene as you were talking to them, you would see what was good was your heart. And when your heart's good, that kind of covers over your words and all that. People can see through that, They can see a good heart. And that's the kind of people we want to be. Jesus said, from the heart flow all our actions. Right? A tree is known by its fruit. Okay? And from the heart flow evil things too. And so that's what we want to be, always repenting at God's word, so that we obey God from our hearts. And then D, lastly, to be like your king, God says, as David says to Solomon here in verse 2, be strong. Be strong in keeping God's commands. Be strong in keeping God's commands. So just flat out there, be strong. 2 Timothy 3:12, Matthew 13 that we read, Mark 13, 1 Peter 4, Matthew 5, all tell us that being strong in keeping God's command is not easy. It's not go with the flow and keep God's commands, and you'll be fine, and you'll keep God's commands if you just go with the flow. No, keeping God's commands is really hard. It's very difficult. We've got our sin natures that are working against us, and Satan who's trying to convince us if we follow our sin nature, that'll be better for us than if we follow God's commands. We think somehow Satan's going to bless us, or doing what our sin nature wants us to do, that'll bring us blessing instead of chaos. And so that's hard for that reason. But it's also hard because when we do what God commands, people don't like us, or we get persecuted. So 2 Timothy 3:12, and indeed all who desire to live godly in Christ Jesus. So if you want to live godly in Christ Jesus, if you want to obey his commands, you will be persecuted. That's what that verse says. All who desire to live godly in Christ Jesus will be persecuted, Paul tells Timothy. Or Matthew 13, 20 through 23. We read there, there was this great pressure for those people who had heard the gospel of persecution. It's the rocky soil. And some people are in the church a while and they like it. They're not regenerated. They don't have saving faith, but they like being in the church. They like learning the things, and everyone's nice to them. Nobody's competing with them, at least if it's a good church. No one's competing with them over things, and it's wonderful being in the church, but then they start getting persecution from those outside the church. What, you go to church? And they have to, so it makes things difficult. It's hard. You can't be weak and consistently follow the commands of God and be like Jesus. Or as Peter says in 1 Peter 4, that there's this great pressure. Those who are outside the church think it's strange that you not, here's what Peter writes in 1 Peter 4:4. They think it's strange that you not plunge with them into the same flood of dissipation, and they heap abuse on you. And then Peter says, but you as a Christian do not live the rest of your earthly life for evil human desires, but rather for the will of God. Mark 13:13. Jesus said, all men will hate you because of me. All men will hate you because of me, but he who stands firm to the end will be saved. What's true for those who are saved? They stand firm to the end. They care about the things of God. They care about glorifying him in their lives, but they have to stay firm. That's part of life in the world before we see Jesus face to face. That's the pleading of the book of Revelation. In the midst of your persecution, stand firm. Hold to the word of your testimony that you believe in Jesus, even if it costs you your life. Hold firm. Stand firm. Be strong. It's tough in this world to be faithful. It's tough in this world to be like our King Jesus. And so we read from Matthew 5. Jim led us in the reading of it this morning as Jesus polishes off the Beatitudes there in Matthew 5, verses 10 through 12. Listen to what Jesus said. Blessed are those. In other words, Christians are blessed in this. Christians are blessed in this. We are persecuted because of righteousness, but ours is the kingdom of heaven. If you're going to be righteous, if you're going to be faithful to do what God asks you to do, you will be persecuted for the sake of righteousness. Because you're being righteous, you will be persecuted. It should be in the world. Because you're doing righteous, people should pat you on the back and say, way to go, everybody follow him, everybody follow her. But the opposite happens. You're despised and trampled upon. Jesus continues, verse 11, blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Not because you're being a jerk, but because of me, and you're acting like me. You're following me. I'm your king. And they say, we hate Jesus and we hate you. Jesus said this in the Gospel of John to his disciples before he left. If they hated me, they will hate you too. Going on in verse 12, rejoice and be glad, he says, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So be strong. Take that great reward. Know that things aren't out of order. You're just like one of the prophets of the Old Testament, being thrown down into a pit, being despised by God's own people. So be strong. Don't be weak. Don't be bendable. Don't be soft when it comes to walking in God's ways. As my brother would say, don't be a pansy. Why did my brother say that? Because he hated me? No, my brother loved me. He wanted me to be better at soccer than he was. He wanted me to be better at clarinet than he was. I followed him in everything he did. He loved me. He's 5 school years ahead of me, and he had learned through a lot of hard knocks, and so he would tell me things. It's like a second dad. My dad was a great dad. My brother was a great second dad for me. He loved me, and he'd take me out on the soccer field. I'd be getting bitten by mosquitoes because it's getting dark out at night. He'd say, come on, John, let's learn this. Be strong. Don't be weak. Yeah, it's hard to obey. It's easy to disobey. It's hard to be like Jesus, but the blessing is great now because you're blessed in the doing, right? James 1:25. But Jesus says, rejoice and be glad, for great is your reward in heaven. You're just chalking up points all your life. Now, you're in the black rectangle. You're going to heaven no matter what. How many points do you want to chalk up? How much reward do you want to get for being faithful? And it can be in little things too. And you're just adding new things. It's like everywhere you go, there's a $100 bill. Do you want to pick it up? When you get to the store, you can use that and buy something that you like. And Jesus is saying, pick up the $100 bills. You got opportunities to be faithful all through your life, and you'll be hated every time you pick up a $100 bill. But Jesus said, that's yours, and I put it there for you. Take it. Pick it up. So be strong. Don't be weak. Your soul's good condition or bad condition on earth, whether you'll be in spiritual malaise or under the Father's discipline, or simply walking in joy and blessing through tough things and fun things both, will be in good measure by how much you're being like your King. So be like your King. Conclusion, just to sum this. As a Christian, follow your shepherd king, Jesus. As God's people are to follow their righteous kings, the sons of David, when they were righteous. Follow your shepherd king, Jesus, living life as he did, faithfully to God, with strength. With strength. That's why God gave us his Spirit. We can walk with him. We can walk with him in strength. Let's pray.